What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the CrazyFaceUno Podcast, where everyone has a story and everyone's story matters. What's your story? As always, I'm your host, Shane McNeeley, and boy, are you in for a treat today. I am actually not introducing a guest other than myself. You're stuck with me today, folks. So welcome to the show. Thank you for joining. Thank you for listening. Very happy to have you. I have had an interesting week. I've had a couple rescheduled podcasts, so you are stuck with me. We did a little rewind on Monday, and I wanted to give you some new content and give you some new information. Just put out another podcast, even if it was by myself. So here we are. You get me today. It's always a little bit intimidating, I'm not going to lie. I hold myself sometimes to a standard that's unrealistic, and so I'm kind of putting myself out there. I don't really know what we're going to talk about. I've created a little bit of a structure for the podcast that I'm trying to stick to a little bit more for the future, and I've been trying to do this anyway, but I just kind of put a little extra thought and extra time into this last week, and so I think I might go through that. I know I've had a lot of people that were interested in kind of hearing my story and hearing about my life, so I think we'll talk a little bit about that, about my life, and we'll go from there, see what happens. But so the way the structure kind of goes is what my guest, which is myself today, is doing now, kind of current day, job title, where they live, married, single, kids, blah, blah, blah. So here we are. As most of you that are probably listening, you've heard my voice, you've heard some of my stories, you've heard quite a few of my opinions and thoughts, and so it should be interesting to hear a little bit more about me. I currently, I'm working on CrazyFaceUno full-time. So what that means, what my day-to-day kind of looks like. Each day is different, to be completely honest, but I'm constantly working on scheduling podcast. I have quite the pipeline going and kind of continually building that out and working towards the future. And I want to always do podcasts, continue to do that, and continue to put out content that is, about people's stories, about people's lives, and just to hear more about them, so we can find those similarities, kind of bridging those gaps between, no matter where we're at in the world, no matter where we're at in our communities, we can find those similarities to say, hey, you know what, like so-and-so and so-and-so and John and whoever. Let's see, this is what you get. John Doe and Jane Doe? They both have these different backgrounds that I'm not familiar with, but man, we have a lot in common, or we've gone through similar struggles, or our mentality or mindset or whatever it is the same, and we're all just trying to figure life out and go through this life to the best of our ability. I was listening to as watching it on Netflix, actually. I'm gonna pull this up. It is called, I actually have it on an audio book as well. If you listen to the podcast with Bethany by Alsma, she mentioned it to me that it would be something that I'd be interested in. It's by Joseph Campbell, and The Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell and Bill Moyers. And oh my goodness, if you have not watched it, it's fascinating. It's so interesting. And he had just talked about, why I bring it up is he had talked about how, legitimately it's this journey. Life is the journey. It's cliche to say like the journey is the destination or whatever, but it's really true. And finding your bliss is kind of how he phrased it, is like finding your bliss. And when you're on that rail, when you're on that track, it's a special place to be. And we've kind of talked about that, like life on purpose, and following your purpose, or pursuing your purpose. And when you're on that, when you're doing that, it's just a whole nother experience in the world. And you get, man, there's like benefits. There's he talks about it and how, I'm terrible at explaining things I've listened to or heard. I don't know. He talks about it a lot and quite a bit in this little series. It's on Audible. It's a book. I think they've typed it out and they've made it into a book, but it's also on Netflix. It's called The Power of Myth, by Joseph Campbell and Bill Moyer. Joseph Campbell, if you're not familiar, he's the author of The Hero with 1,000 Faces, which is another book that I'm interested in reading. He's got several books. It's all in myth and different like his experience. He's a professor, I believe, and kind of talking about myth. But anyway, I've really been, this project has been me kind of pursuing a dream, pursuing a passion, pursuing something that I want to pursue, and having that creative control over something, which has been really, it's been great. It's been a struggle. I realize my limitations on my own quite often, and full transparency, this week it's been an interesting week. I struggle with my own like self-doubt, my own struggles every day, and I'm saying it because, man, I'm bringing it back to maybe it was something different, but just voicing it and putting it into the world. Like, have you said it? And have you spoke it into existence? Have you said what your issue is? And I think that a lot of times when you can kind of own it, and you give a voice, you give words to maybe your struggles, to the things you want, to the things you need, it almost takes the power against you away, especially your struggles, that struggle that you're going through. Now, this doesn't mean you go out and air out all your dirty laundry and, just say whatever you want. But, I think that there are times when it's important to be like, hey, this is what I'm working on. This is a struggle of mine, and kind of keeps you honest, gives you some integrity. Oh, well, more about me. So yeah, my wife and I, we just moved to Coconut Creek, Florida. If you're just tuning in, you're just learning of that. If you're new to the show, so we live in Coconut Creek, Florida. It's South Florida, just north of Fort Lauderdale and Miami, about 30-45 minutes without traffic. Just south of Disney World, about 4 hours. So if you are in the area, let us know. Love to keep in touch or touch base with some of our old friends, or even make some new friends. So if you are in the Coconut Creek area, South Florida area, make a comment. Have a comment on Instagram, and shoot us a DM and let us know. Maybe we can double date, or grab dinner. We love food. Sit and chat. We'd love to. So always open to meeting new people. I do have to say, I don't know if you guys can hear it, but part of my family's life, which is my wife and I, is our fur baby, Chancey Poo. You can see more pictures of him on Instagram at the Chancey Poo. He's got his own little Instagram, something fun we do every once in a while, and throw some pictures up. He's currently snoring, sitting underneath my feet. So enjoy that. Kind of his MO. What else? Yeah, my wife, she got a promotion at work. She worked in Minneapolis at a medical manufacturing company, medical device company that brought us here, and it was kind of an internal transfer that brought us down to this area, and we're living life and making the most of the time here. I really enjoy Florida. I've enjoyed the time that I've been here. You know, I do really love, and there's very few people in this world I think that don't, but I really do love the beach and just sand between your toes and the sun, and it's just a nice thing to be able to go to and just get away, and there's a peace that you kind of get when you're there. And here maybe it's hearing the waves crash against the sand of the shore, and something about sand between your toes and that salt water. There's a smell. I've been talking about that with my wife. I'm excited for us to like go away from here and then come back. There's just like a smell to that saltwater air that you really notice it when you first, move somewhere, move down, or you first arrive in like a Gulf area or like a oceanside area. And you get used to it, and I really love that smell. There's just something about that saltwater air that there's something nostalgic about it. Maybe it's my time in San Diego. I'm not sure, but I really love it. I enjoy it. I was checking the temperature this morning. I was messaging my mom, and she had reached out to me and was talking about the fall weather and the fall leaves. It's something that fall is beautiful. I love fall. I always said that the fall time was my favorite season. And then I moved out to San Diego for a few years and lived out there. And don't get me wrong, I miss the seasons. I like seeing the leaves change. But I'm fine with it not being in my life. I like seeing the pictures and seeing the leaves change, that's for sure. But I don't know. I'm okay without it. It is 84 degrees here this morning at about 9 o'clock. I don't know what time it is now, to be honest, but earlier this morning it was about 84 degrees. It's been pretty humid lately, but it's good. It's great. Sun's out, and depending on how much work I get done today, I might take a little stroll down to the beach and relax a bit and kick the weekend off a little early. Got a podcast lined up this weekend, and got a pretty busy weekend. So what else can I tell you? Like I said, I am married. You can check out my wife's podcast. She's got a couple that she's been on. We have our dog named Chance. He's an American Staffordshire Bull Terrier. He's got 3 legs. He's a cutie. It's a little tripod. He was hit by a car in Texas, San Antonio area, a few years ago, and he was rescued and ended up finding himself in Minnesota, where we just moved from. And my wife, through connections at work, she found out about him, and the rest is history. He is now our pooch, and we love him very much. We're that couple that allows him to sleep in the bed with us, so he's very much a part of our family. So we love him very, very much. Right, dude? He's dreaming down here. His one back leg's just kicking away. So, all right, well, let's dig in a little bit now that I've been rambling about nonsense for the last 14 minutes here. Let's go back to childhood. And one of the questions, and if you've been listening, that I've been asking has been, what was your childhood like? And I love this question. I am an only child. I have a stepbrother and sister. They came along a little bit later in life, junior, senior year of high school. So I grew up most of my life as an only child, which, something else that people say a lot on here is, well, I just don't know any different. I don't know any different. And I feel very similarly to that. Like, I didn't know any different growing up. I always wanted siblings. I always wanted, people to hang out with. I thought it would be fun. I thought it'd be, you get to have this companion, this person to run around with. But I don't know. I think that very much that being a part of my life is definitely, helped shape who I am today. And my childhood was good. I have a lot of really good memories about my childhood. If you go back and you listen, I've done podcasts with my family, my mom, my grandma, my dad, and you can hear a little bit more in depth about, some of life and some of, my childhood for sure. When I was born, my mother was diagnosed with cancer shortly after I was born. And it was a rare form of breast cancer. And so she had a lot of, health issues at a younger age, at my young age. And my grandma, my dad was in school and he was going to school at the time. And so he was busy as well. And so my grandma really stepped in and helped our family out, and helped raise me, especially the first couple of years of my life. And my grandma, Della Paul, she's a very special lady in my life. I always say that she's the most important person in my life. I love her very much. There's a connection, there's a bond that we have that is amazing. I really cherish my relationship with my grandma. And I remember, so many different things. I remember one of the stories I can tell you about when I was younger was I always loved playing with like candles and wax, and I don't know, we had this like, I don't even know what I was doing, to be completely honest, but she had a candle and I started playing with the wax, and kind of as the candle would melt, I would make little designs or pull the wax into different parts of the plate that it was sitting in. And I was using toothpicks and different things. And at some point in time, of course you can see what's about to happen, but there was a little bit of fire that took place, and it kind of got a little bit bigger than it needed to and should have. And we kind of freaked out for a second and ended up getting it taken care of. But it's a climactic story, but it's way funnier than maybe if she was here to help tell the story and help explain some of the details. I was so young. But those are kind of the shenanigans. I remember she had, I can picture, she still lives in the same house that she's lived for my entire life. And so my grandma Della and my dad's parents, Edith and Doug, so they've both passed away. Now my dad still owns that house, so it's still in the family at the moment. But one of the things that I find comforting, because my family and I've moved a lot, and my parents don't live in the same places as like growing up or anything like that. Those homes feel like home. My grandma Della, her house feels like home. And so same with my other side of my dad's side of the family. Like, there's just something comforting about those homes that I've always known. I'm 31 years old, so for 31 years those have been the two most stable and stagnant places as far as a building or home that I've had in my life. And so those places, there's so many memories there. I would go out into our garden. They always had this big, big garden. And I remember one side was the flowers, and my grandma had her flowers in like the first couple rows. and then it was tomatoes, and then it was the other plants, peppers and whatever. And then on the very far end, she had strawberry, plants down on the other side. And so it was kind of like all the vegetables and stuff were in the middle, and the strawberries were on the other end. And my grandma was a cook, so she would use all that. She would can the food. She would, make pies, make, desserts and things out of the strawberries. And, oh man, I just remember all those different things. I loved fishing growing up. So I loved going fishing, and I'd always I love bugs and insects as well. I remember, spending time there, and I always had my butterfly nets, is what I called them, and my little, I don't know what they're called. I mean, they're like insect homes or whatever. It's what they're just cages, but they have the wire mesh or the wire screen, and then they were like a semicircle or like a half, an oval cut in half kind of deal, elongated semicircle with a little opening where you could stick a bug or stick whatever, the insect. And I'd always collect bugs, and I had a bunch of those, and I'd stick them in there. I'd catch big praying mantis. I made the mistake of putting a female and a male in together, and they did their thing when they mate, and then the female chops off its head. And I learned that at a young age, that's what happens. And what else could I say? My grandma's house. So yeah, if you walk in her front door, so I'm gonna walk you through her home. When you walk in the front door, they've moved things around a little bit, but I believe the way it is right now is when you first walk in, the TV is on this little TV stand. It's right there next to this big window, this bay window, sitting right there. And there's a couch on the left side, a couch on the right side, and then a chair back in the corner next to the TV. So you couldn't see the TV if you were in that chair. It used to be how it was, and I honestly couldn't tell you if that's still how it is today. And then to the right, when you first walk in the door, is my grandparents' room. So that was where my grandparents always lived. And then right next to that, further down the house, the next room over, was the spare bedroom. And when they had kids, when my mom and Steven were alive, that was their bedrooms. There was 10 years between my mom and her brother. And so, and they had another little room off the bathroom that was a bedroom for a bit. But once my mom moved out, excuse me, I'm going to have a little coffee. I believe my uncle moved into that room as well. And then there's the little, another little family living room area. There's a antique wooden hutch that was my great grandpa's, and that is a family heirloom that my grandpa wanted whenever his dad passed away. There's a little couch on the right side there, and my grandma has this big a china cabinet where she's got all of her nice dishes and different figurines and whatnot. And then there's the bathroom to the right, and still got, used to be is the old sink that was still in there. And there was a scale back, and they had a closet area. It was a big closet, which was one of the bedrooms that I was kind of talking about. And there was always this big scale in there, and I always loved to go stand on the scale and measure my height and my weight when I was younger. And that was their storage space. So a little cupboard, they'd put their, toilet paper and the paper towels and extra canned goods and whatever else it was, kind of a little storage space that they always used. My grandpa had his socks were in there, and his dresser, and I think that was also where he used to keep his guns. They were up on a rack above his dresser there. And he had his shotgun and his different things that were in there. And then if you keep moving on through the house, so if you go back out and through the house, there's the kitchen. And that's where the fire incident that I was telling you about took place. It was, it's just a memorable time. I don't know why that was we laughed so hard about it afterwards. And my mom and my grandma were just sitting there talking, but it's where a lot of good times were had, was in that little kitchen right there. And, yeah, so then later on in life they added on, and so they have an addition. It's kind of like the main family room where everybody kind of hangs out and sits. And it used to be just a porch that just went straight off the back and into the backyard where there's a chicken coop, chicken house. They never had chickens as far as I know, and it's still full of antiques and full of a bunch of different stuff. And they also have a big old barn that's down the way on the other side of the garden. And they live out in the middle of nowhere. It's a little town called Gilead, Indiana. If you're interested, you should definitely look it up on a map. It's probably less than 50 people. The Amish have kind of called this area their home now and kind of moved into the area. There's a large number of Amish people that have kind of came into that area and started making that their home and raising their family. The different fields, so they've got lots of pasture for their horses and for their animals, and it's just been an area that they've begun to call home. One other memory I have was my grandma always had, it's like those old school desks with the little, it didn't lift up, but it had like the little slot underneath. She had one of those, and there was a bunch of books down in there. Maybe it did lift up, but there was a bunch of books down in there nonetheless. And that was where she had all these books. And so I'd get a bath and I'd want her to read these books to me. When I was super, super little, that was like our thing. And so, I just have the one that sticks out to me is, there was like Bambi was in there. There was a Mickey Mouse one. I called Mickey Mouse Mickey Guck. And when I was little, that was like the thing. And then Smokey the Bear, for whatever reason, that one sticks out to me as well. I was remembering those old stories. It's a good time, but nonetheless, my grandma is a very important person in my life, and her husband Verdon, my grandpa, still alive. He is. They're both still live in that same house, and my grandpa had a stroke several years back, and he's got dementia. From that, it's caused some dementia, and he's diabetic, and so there's been some issues and been some things that have came up with that, and which is unfortunate. Puts a lot of stress and a lot of work on my grandma, who's getting older as well. But she is the most amazing cook in the world. So I have been able to learn, I feel like, a lot from my grandma of learning how to cook and watching, and I think maybe that's why I love to cook so much now, is just because of her her career, I guess. She was the head cook at an elementary school for over 30 years, or around 30 years, and I had some very fond memories of going into that kitchen and helping her out, and learning and observing and watching how things go, and I love it. If you haven't picked up, there's smells or something. Like I have this, I don't know if it's a stronger sense of smell than anybody, but I have a very strong sense of smell. And I remember the smell of like those kitchens whenever I'd walk in there and help her out, and the smell of the back room where all the canned goods were. And I don't know, there's just like, it's like a nostalgic smell that comes from that. But yeah, growing up myself, so I was until the age of 2, I lived, in that area where my grandparents live. Akron, Indiana is where my dad's side of the family, and then my mom's side of the family still lives in Gilead. My grandma Della and Verdun. And so until I was 2, I lived there with my mom and my dad, and then we moved to a little town in Illinois called Buda, Illinois. My dad was a pastor. He was a pastor there in Buda, Illinois. And, so I grew up in this little house across from a Casey's grocery store, or Casey's general store. We've got the gas and the pizza and the little kitchens back there, and like your classic convenience store. And I have very fond memories of that. And if you listen to the podcast I just did on Wednesday with Natalie Samodia, I mentioned just different places that my dad would always go in the morning and kind of shoot the shit and have conversation and talk and whatever. And Casey's was one of those places. It's kind of where I started off. I'd go over to Casey's with my dad and get a donut. And I have very good memories of that place as well. There was this big tree. I want to say it was an oak tree in the back. And I guess it wasn't super big, but it seemed big to me because I was little, and I would always climb that tree. It was like my tree. And that was one of my fond memories. I can see that tree. I remember a story. I had spent some time with my grandmas or my grandparents, and like I said, they live out in the middle of nowhere. And I came home, and I had picked up a little bit of a habit, and I would just go behind the chicken house, and I would, pee in the tall grass behind there when I was little. And so I thought I could do that at my house, and it was in the front yard next to the bushes. And needless to say, my parents put a kibosh to that and made sure I didn't do that. And right across the street from the Casey's and the main street that ran through this little town of Buda, Illinois. I remember I was always really obsessed, I guess, or I loved insects and I loved rocks. So I would go out into the rock bed. They paved built a garage behind this house, and they put all fresh new rocks out. And I would go out there and I would dig through these rocks, and I'd look through these rocks and look for these. I don't know even what specific ones I was looking for. I just knew it when I saw it. I was like, oh, I really like that one. And I'd collect these rocks in a bucket. And I never really do too much with them, but I always loved them. I always loved rocks and gems. And I had, I have Cherokee, Native American in my family. And so I think that's another reason that I was obsessed with. But I really liked Native American figurines and rocks, and those were things I had a lot of interest in. I had my dresser, and I had these like rabbit skins. Just put the rabbit skins out, and I had these like Native American, paraphernalia, basically these eagles and these like statues of like a chief head that I'd have sitting, and I'd decorate my dresser to look a specific way. My grandma, so the school that she worked at was the North Miami, and they were the Warriors. And I don't know if that had something to do with it too. Like, I always saw those in her house, those figurines and those types of things. But those were the things I got for my birthday a lot of times, were those different like big old eagle, like figurines with, Indian, Native American, paraphernalia, whether it was just whatever it was. I don't know. There were so many different things, but that was always something I loved growing up. Oh man. Buda, there was a funny story. We had a garden there. My family's always been into gardening. My family's always been, something I really value as a child was sitting down to dinner every night with my family, with my mom and my dad. And, growing up in the Christian home that I did, our thing was we'd always sit down, we'd say a prayer, we'd give thanks to the food that we had, and then we'd eat. And my mom, and I don't know if my dad did too much, but my mom was the one that, cooked most of the time growing up, and these homemade meals, and she was always the best cook as well. My mom is a fantastic cook, and I've got a whole line of fantastic cooks in my life and my family. And I've learned a lot from them. I love to cook now. I'm the one that cooks at home, and there's a creative process of cooking that's just so fun and enjoyable, and kind of the manipulation and the creativity that you get through cooking. I don't know. Something special. I really enjoy it. I love food so much. I would eat until I would blow up if I could. I love flavor. I love tasting things. But anyway, that's one of the things that I really cherish as a child. We didn't not eat at the dinner table very often. It was just the thing we did. And it was every night, and it was just that time that we got to spend with each other, and I really, really appreciate that. I really, really value that time, those moments. I think it was a special time. There's something special about meals in general in life, when you're able to sit down and share a meal with someone. You give them your attention, you give them this space, this time. You get to hold that space together, and sharing of food. It's a special thing. I think, so many people, so many families and lives, myself, we get busy and we forget to take that time to kind of just be still and engage each other and talk with each other and talk with one another. And still something that, my wife and I, we still do. And oftentimes we'll throw something on the TV, but that's our time to catch up. It's like, hey, how was your day? What's going on? What would you do? What'd you do today? Like, oh, that stinks, or oh, that's awesome, or whatever it is. And, we talk about what's to come, the future, and, what we're going to do this weekend, or what we're going to do in the next couple of days, or, hey, do you want to do this? Or did you check that out? And, it's just a special time. I think that those moments, the moment around a dinner table, the moment of sharing food and nourishing yourself in that way, both with company and with food and with just holding that time together. I think it's special. There you go. I'm going to have another sip of coffee here. Woo, man, just cruising right along. So it was Butte, Illinois, and this would be first grade for me. So it was halfway through the winter time, I believe, of my first grade year, kind of spring, winter, that we moved to Charleston, Illinois. And I lived in Charleston, Illinois from first grade till sixth grade, and we moved again there. Charleston was, my dad pastored a church there. Charleston, East Harrison Street Church of God is what I believe it was called. Tony Romo went to school at Eastern Illinois, which is in Charleston, Illinois. That's a football player for the Dallas Cowboys. There you go. There's their claim to fame. But I was always big into sports. I feel like this was the time that I started to really get into and started to learn my love for sports. I started playing soccer. That was one of the first ones. I played a little swarm ball. If you're a parent out there and you have a child that's in soccer, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So we lived there. We lived in it's called a parsonage. The church provided a home for us, and it was right next to the church. And it was out in in the country, just outside of town. And so we were surrounded by fields, and they would alternate year in and year out. It'd be beans, corn, beans, corn. Every once in a while they'd double up, but they'd go back and forth. And so we always had, each year it was different, but it was a fun time. There's a tree in the front yard that I would climb. The church had this big parking lot, and so I had rollerblades, and I'd rollerblade. And being an only child, this was the time that I started to. It was a coming of age kind of time of my life, I guess, and this allowed me to. I think it really spurred my creativity. You had to get creative. Like I didn't have siblings, and a lot of times my mom was around, especially in the summers. She was home, but my dad working next door, it allowed her to, she had a job and she worked as well, and so it allowed her to kind of go and do her own thing. And if I needed anything, I just went over to the church and said, "Hey, Dad," and he would, "Time for lunch, let's go." And so he'd come over to the house and fix lunch. Legitimately, it was just a parking lot between us. So it was, I mean, I grew up in a church. I grew up running around the church and, running through the basement or running through whatever it was. It was just a thing that I did. Man, what is going on out there? Oh, it is pouring rain. So we're getting a little rain shower here today. I was like, what is that sound? But yeah, so they ended up adding on and building onto that church, and there was a big dirt mound in the back. And I remember I would take my bike and I made little ramps, and I'd run my bike as fast as I could, and I'd ramp up this hill and try to ramp off it. I'd crash so hard sometimes, and I think I learned, some toughness that way, and I couldn't just run to my dad. And, I don't know. I feel like I was a tough little kid, and, I was getting banged up and hurting myself. And I'd do the same. I'd put these little board up and on bricks or whatever, and I'd try to ramp with my bike with that too. And I would set up. I had a hockey stick and, the little hockey ball, and I'd play. I was inspired by the Mighty Ducks. I loved the Mighty Ducks growing up. That was one of my favorite movies, that series. I had a slingshot, one of those little slingshots, and I got to have a lot of fun with that. I remember one time I was always trying to hit a bird, or, mostly birds. There weren't really much else. And I remember there was one time I finally hit one, but I just kind of stunned it, and I felt so bad, and I felt like the worst person ever. It just made me feel so sad. It ended up being fine and flying away, but I remember just feeling so bad about shooting this bird. I don't know if it ever stopped me from doing it again, but I just felt really bad about it. I don't know. I had golf clubs, so I would, I had all this big backyard, so I'd hit the golf clubs around. I hit a golf ball around. When they would harvest the field, I would go and I'd get the pieces, the corn cob, the corn cob pieces that still had corn on it, and I'd shuck that corn into a bucket, and I'd go looking for that. Still bugs and butterflies and whatever. This was more in Charleston, but I would catch these caterpillars, and they'd spin their cocoons, and I'd put them, like I said, I was obsessed with them, so I'd put these in these jars, and they'd spin their webs, or their cocoons, not the webs, and then they'd hatch. And it was always a really cool process to be a part of, and it wasn't through school. It was just something that I learned about. I had these books and bug books and whatnot. But yeah, I'd play soccer. I had to get creative. I remember that, like I mentioned before, I had that big dirt mound in the backyard, and it was in the parking lot, and I would climb this big dirt mound, and I grabbed a shovel, and I'd dig these big, these big holes, and I would pretend to make these booby traps and play like, I don't know what I was playing. Made up some scenario in my head and would play these out all by myself. So these were all things I would do by myself, and maybe it makes sense as to why my brain is always thinking nowadays. My brain never shuts off, I swear. But yeah, this was a big part of my life at that time for sure. Soccer really grew again. I started, getting more and more involved with soccer, and I got on different travel teams, and this is kind of where I started my, baseball and soccer. But soccer, I got on different travel teams. I would go to the different soccer camps and really sharpening my skills and learning how to play soccer. Started playing baseball as well, and it got to be the point where I was on a 12-year-old Bambino, all-star team with baseball, and I was on these travel leagues with soccer, and we were doing that every weekend. And eventually it came to the point where my parents were like, you got to pick one, and it's too much for us to run around. I couldn't go to soccer games because I had baseball games, or vice versa, and so there's just too much conflict and too much conflicting with one another, and I ended up choosing soccer. And I guess that kind of is a prequel to the rest of my life in some ways. Like, soccer really opened the doors and opened my eyes to a lot of different things and a lot of different experiences in my life. So yeah, that was at Charleston that my dad left the ministry, and we got out of there. And for a year we stayed. This was my 6th grade year. We stayed, and I think we just rented this little house in town. And so we had this little house in a little neighborhood, and I'd ride my bike around that neighborhood all the time. And that's where I started. I rode the bus to school, and I did that when I was younger too, I guess. I rode the bus when I was little, even in Charleston. But I guess I remember it more there. I'd ride the bus to and from school, and my mom worked in special education, and so in elementary school, she worked at my elementary school. She was in the 1st grade or 2nd grade classroom or whatever it was. And she worked with a blind autistic boy. And that was who she primarily worked with. And it was really, that was just something I grew up with. I would ride to school with my mom usually. And I would spend time in that classroom and got to know this, this very unique, special group of kids. And, later on in life, I worked in special education myself, and I just always been around it. It was just been something I never thought twice about it. It was just, these are, kids that need someone to support them and to love them and to help them along. And so I spent time in that classroom a lot. My mom, I remember, I don't know the timeline, but I know at least in my 6th grade year, she was working with a gal, a lady, a woman in high school, and she was her one-on-one aide. And so I would take the bus to school. She would drive to school. Then I would take the bus from the elementary school to the high school, and then I'd come into the school, and we would leave together from there. It felt like the longest walk, and I started playing the saxophone when I was in Charleston that 6th grade year. And I remember I was just this little runt, and I remember carrying my big old saxophone case, and I felt like it was the heaviest thing in my book bag, and it was just the worst. I remember hating it. It was like that trek from the bus stop all the way through the school to find my mom was always I dreaded it. I remember dreading it. I don't know if she ever knew that I dreaded it, but it was there that I really started fishing, and my dad and I would go down to the river, and we'd fish there, and we had a few different places that we'd go, and he'd take me to these different ponds or different places that we knew people, and they'd let us fish their ponds and fish their places. And that was when I really learned and grew to love, the outdoors, I think, as well. Oh, one thing I didn't mention, down the street from the church where we lived, and the house that we lived there, probably like a mile and a half down the road, there was this lady who had, I don't know why she had them. I was too young to really understand. I should ask my parents about this, but she had all these like exotic animals. So she had like, I think 2 or 3 spider monkeys. She had a couple other little monkeys there. She had a kangaroo at one time, she had pigs, she had ducks, she had chickens, she had snakes, she had, I mean, you name it, she had it. She had this one baboon. It was like the ones with like the red butts. I think we used to call it the red butt monkey. But she had a couple of those too. And one time it got loose, and it was like out in the wild, and they didn't know where it was. And us being just down the road, like they had this area locked down. They feared that it was dangerous, and if it got near people, like it wasn't afraid of people, and they were afraid it might harm people. So we got this notice, and we get home, and I don't know what had happened, but we walked into our house and the back screen door was like wide open. So we'd been gone all day, and our like back door was like open, and my mom and I were terrified. I think that we even like ran back to the car and like had to sit in the car and wait until my dad or somebody came and kind of like walk through the house to make sure there wasn't a monkey in our house. But I don't even remember how that turned out, but I just remembered that whole experience. Very interesting. I have a lot of fond memories of going to the soccer games at Eastern Illinois and cheering on the Panthers. We were friends with a lot of the women's team, and so I had a really close connection to some of those players, and I used to think they were just the coolest things. And I look back, and it's so funny how you perceive different things or perceive people at different ages, and little kids, you perceive people differently. And I used to think that those girls that were playing soccer, and even the guys, felt untouchable because I didn't really know them very well, but it felt so special to be able to go over and like say hi and go meet the players and get high fives from them, and taking their, being a part of their camps. It was also, you had this added thing, like I got to know them through the camps, and then, I'd ball boy. I always loved to try to like go and get the balls when they'd kick them over the net or whatever. And I felt like I was the most special person, getting to go take them over to the other side and give them to the team or whatever. I always felt like the coolest thing. Sometimes I would ball boy. I'd be like the little ball boy. And so if the ball would go out of bounds, I'd throw him the ball and go get so that was really special. Another story I have is I remember this was like the first time I really kind of learned to hustle. And there was this wintry, snowy winter. And I started going to my neighbors, and I started shoveling their driveways and their sidewalks. And it ended up being, I don't think I did it other than just like doing it. It started off, but then they started giving me money. And so I just go up and knock on the door and be like, hey, can I shovel your driveway or shovel your sidewalk? And generally the first question is like, well, what are you charging? And I'd be like, whatever you think I'm worth. Whatever you think it's worth, or whatever you want, like, it doesn't matter. And, which, sometimes played to my benefit and sometimes it didn't, but, that was my hustle. And I ended up making like $150, $200, or I don't know, between $100 and $200 that year. And it was the first year that I had ever been able to buy all my family, Christmas gifts. So I got everybody, and I think from that point on, I pretty much had bought my family Christmas gifts, and kind of a cool little thing to do. And we moved after that year. So my 6th grade year, we moved, and we ended up it was that summer, going into my 7th grade year, we moved to Sullivan, Indiana, which is where I went to middle school and high school. And Sullivan, it was a good little town. It was a nice little town. I have a lot of fond memories there as well. Super small town, I mean, it smaller than Charleston, way bigger than, I think it's like 26,000. I want to say. That could be wrong. I could look this up while we're doing this, but yeah, this is kind of when I started to have a little more freedom in, I feel like, my life. It's like the 12, 13, mark, kind of that area. And my mom and my dad would give me a little bit more leeway. Again, it was a small enough town that my dad, he worked in town. He got his real estate license. And so he worked close enough for me to just ride my bike to his work. So if I need anything, I could just go to his work and ride my bike there. And then my mom, she generally had the summers off. She worked at the middle school in special education. That's kind of where I'm trying to look up Sullivan, Indiana. That's where she had. Oh, I was way off. Population is, in 2011, the population was 4,224. So, we'll just say around 5,000, which I feel like that's gone down because I remember a 6 being in there. I feel like it was like 6,000 maybe at one point in time. But anyway, here we are. Yeah, so she worked at the school. She did some other things in the summer, and so like sometimes she was around, sometimes she had stuff she was doing, but it was at that age where I had that freedom. My parents gave me that freedom, and I could ride my bike around and do whatever. And I started mowing lawns around that time with my dad working at the real estate. Century 21 is where he worked. It kind of gave me the opportunity, when they needed somebody to mow a lawn for a yard or whatever, I could go do that. And so I'd make, $20-25 every time I'd mow somebody's yard, and started getting different gigs and different, things through that. And that was the way that I kind of started that hustle, I guess, as I continued on, as I got older. Continued to fish, I was a little, I don't know, that was an interesting period of time in my life. 7th and 8th grade year, probably one of the hardest times. I don't really talk about it too much in my life, but I was bullied quite a bit, and was definitely one of the hardest moments of my life, hardest times of my life. I just really had a hard time. I wanted to fit in. I came from, Charleston, where I knew everybody. Everybody knew me, and we were all close. And, it was elementary school. I feel like it was just, you just accepted people. Everybody was just, you grew up with everybody, so you just knew who they were. And then moving to Sullivan, where I guess it's probably the same for them, but, now I'm the outsider, the new person, and I dress differently or dressed weird. I remember I'll never forget, because I never did it again, but I wore a turtleneck to school one day, and middle school, and I didn't do that again. That was the last time I believe I ever wore a turtleneck out in public, outside of cutting weight for wrestling. I got, teased and made fun of, and, punched, pushed, picked on. I dreaded after lunch. I dreaded lunch in general, like the classic thing. I was like, didn't know where to sit, didn't know where you fit in. People would, razz you and give you a hard time, make fun of you. And then afterwards you'd walk from the cafeteria to the little gym that we had that was not connected to the middle school. And it was like from that point to there, it was always bad. And, people would, whatever, like you'd get knocked down or pushed or picked on. And then you get to the gym and it didn't get any better. And just kind of continued to get razzed and pushed or basketball thrown at you and, knocked over. And I love sports, so I'd always want to play or whatever, but just never really was that great of a thing for me at that period of time in my life. And I was like the little duck in a big pond. I just had a really hard time during that time. Throughout that time, I was still playing soccer. They didn't really have a soccer program at the middle school. The high school had just started one up my 8th grade year. They had finally started up a soccer program. So I ended up playing in a travel league that was about 30 minutes north of our house in Terre Haute, Indiana. And so my family would take me up there like 2 or 3 days a week, and I'd practice, and then on the weekends we'd go and travel to wherever the matches, the games were, and the tournaments or whatever it was. And once I got out of middle school and went to high school, I finally started to find my group of people. It was like finally we were all like little ducks in a big pond, and people stopped picking on me. I found my group of people in the soccer team, and having pretty much the most experience on the team, it allowed me the opportunity to really kind of have that, I don't know if influence, but a little bit more respect, and people kind of respected me a little bit more. And it was through soccer that I actually found out about wrestling and was talked into wrestling. And I believe it was Jared Pirtle and Jade McCammon and Chase. What was his last name? Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. Chase. I dated his sister, Erica. And it was those 3 guys for sure. And I'm sure there was somebody else I'm leaving out, but those 3 guys were the ones we were on a bus, and they were like, you should join, wrestling. You should join the team. And they needed a like lightweight guy, and the little guys. I ended up wrestling 112 was my freshman year, and I could have wrestled 10. I think it was 103 at the time. I didn't weigh very much, and there were definitely times when I was at that weight, but I didn't know any better at the time, so I wrestled 112, and that's what we needed, somebody at that weight, so it worked out well for us. So it was high school, like I said, that kind of I started to hit my stride. Really got to shine on the soccer team. It was tough sledding the first couple of years of my wrestling career, but it was after that I really started to grasp things and take off. And I contribute my success in wrestling a lot to the fact that I played soccer all my life, and I played this team sport that you're only as good as your team. It's a team mentality, to then going to wrestling, and where it's what you put into it. It's you get out what you put in, and if you want to work hard, and I was always a hard worker. I always worked my tail off. I always worked really hard in sports. I wouldn't say I did in my studies or school or anything like that at that point in time. I just didn't really care about that kind of thing very much, but I did all right. But yeah, I started really putting the time in, and I had great coaches. I had great people around me, and my coaches in soccer and wrestling were two of they're two of the people that I look back on that time that I appreciate and respect the most. Tom Leahy was my soccer coach. He was a conservation officer in the town, and man, he he had my back. He treated me very well and very kind, and same with Roy. Roy Monroe was my wrestling coach, and both of those guys, looking back now, after being a coach myself, I look at their lives and I how they brought me in and took me in as their own. And it's unfortunate that you can't really, it's probably frowned upon these days, kind of the way they took me in. I went fishing with Tom. He took me to this out on his boat, and we went fishing together, which was really fun. And then Roy we'd play poker after tournaments and stuff, like the team and at his house. And during the freestyle and Greco season, he'd be like, just come on over and we'll leave first thing in the morning. So, a group of us would go and we'd sleep on his floor, sleep on his couch or whatever it was. And we'd get up and head out to the tournament the next day, and just always had my back. And this was a time period, my sophomore year, I believe, was when junior year was when my parents, they ended up splitting up, and they ended up getting a divorce there at that time. And I think that was one of the reasons that my coaches stepped up so big was kind of, I don't know if they saw that I needed that, or I don't know what that was. I'd love to have them on one of these days just to talk about their lives and talk about that time of my life for sure. And but nonetheless, they just played such a huge role in my life. And one of the biggest reasons that I ended up wanting to coach myself was because of them and because of the time. And I saw how important they were in my life at that time, and what a big role they played in my life. And so Roy and Tom, if you're listening at all, or if you're out there listening, thank you so much. I'm sure that you don't realize the impact that you had on people's lives, but you had a big impact on my life, and I wouldn't be who I am today if it wasn't for you guys. So thank you so much for stepping up and for filling that gap and for being there for me and showing me that love and support and encouraging me to be the best that I could be. It means a lot. It meant a lot then, and it means a lot now. So thank you. High school, let's see. You get to that like sophomore, junior year is when, I continued to play soccer, continued to excel. This is when our team, the first group of, travel league kids kind of came up through the ranks and joined the soccer team, which allowed us to really excel. And we did really well. We competed in our conference. We went from my freshman year of losing like 11-0, 13-1, 12-9-0. I mean, those were some of the scores. It was terrible. It was rough. It's the worst. To competing with some of these teams, and we ended up tying for the conference championship. I think we won it once, I believe. I don't know. We tied it. We were up there at the top a couple times, and which was really cool. It was a really fun experience and allowed us to, to compete, and allowed us to be in the game and to have those moments of glory, if you will. And very close group of guys. I really appreciated that soccer team, and those guys who'd come over to my house a lot, and we'd hang out. One of my best friends at the time freshman year was, Andy, good old Andy Smith. And then later on it was Dusty Adams and, Ryan Haberstadt. And several other guys I know that I'm leaving out, so if they're listening, I really do apologize. But it's just, you had those moments of that camaraderie and that group of people that you're allowed to, spend that time with. It was then that I, started to excel wrestling. I ended up being part of Team Indiana my junior year, going into my junior year and then going into my senior year. And my first year, I didn't do very well. I won my first match. I bruised or separated my ribs or cracked my ribs or something on my back. And I lost all my matches after that, my first year, which kind of sucked because I started off with a bang and felt really good. You work really hard to get to that point. It sucks to have injuries. The next year, I ended up doing both. I did Team Indiana and I went to Fargo to wrestle individual nationals as well. And Fargo, this was for Greco-Roman wrestling, and at Team Indiana. So for the team aspect of things, I went 4-2 that year. And then when I went out to Fargo, I went 2-2. So I did an All-American, didn't do anything like that, but I felt very, very good about my success and my ability to wrestle out there. And, I continued to do that. And that's been one of my passions is wrestling. I love wrestling a lot. It's taught me so much about life, and I encourage anyone, male, female, or otherwise, just to give it a try. It's teaches you a lot about life, a lot about yourself, and not accepting your limitations and to going for it. I ended up finding the school, Bethel College, now Bethel University, because of wrestling. One of my family friends. I would go train at their gym, and he was assistant coach there, and told me about Bethel, and I went and checked it out, and I fell in love with Bethel. And unfortunately, they ended up dropping their wrestling program before my senior year, so I ended up not, deciding not to wrestle. But I did put in my recruitment information for soccer, and got a very small scholarship, and I never made varsity. It was on the JV team, for 3 years, and it was my third year there that I decided that I was going to not play, and I was just going to focus on school and getting done and moving on. My junior year was an exhausting year, but yeah, I went to college. I studied nursing my freshman year. I was about halfway through my first year, that first, semester or whatever. And I was like, I don't think this is it. And I kind of talked about it before, but I decided that, I was going to I didn't get into the nursing program. Grades weren't good enough, I think it was my ACT score wasn't high enough. I needed to retake that. I was off by 1 point on one of my scores. And, so it was just a whole thing, and I just chalked it up as confirmation that I didn't want to do that, and that wasn't for me. So I was really interested in counseling and counseling teens. Growing up, I was really inspired by Patch Adams. So Patch Adams, it's a movie with Robin Williams, and I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to work pediatric oncology, so work with kids with cancer. I had this connection with my mom having cancer, and I loved kids, and I loved, making people laugh and smile. And that movie it changed me. It made me think about the world differently. It made me think about things differently. It still does. It's a beautiful book. Probably a book too, but it's a beautiful movie. And that movie, there is actually still the Gesundheit Institute. So if you're interested, check that out. But yeah, so I was interested in counseling teens, going through my experience with divorce, and through that made me want to kind of, pour back in and to help people. I've always wanted to help people. It's always been something that I wanted to do for as long as I can remember. And so, yeah, and I could go two different directions. Staying at Bethel, I could go the psychology route. Going to require the, postgraduate program for counseling, or the Christian ministries route when I was at this Christian college, this liberal arts Christian college. And so I decided to go that direction. I want to learn more about the Bible, and growing up in the church, my dad was a pastor and all that. It seemed like the thing that I was interested in. And my advisor at the time was like, really sounds like youth ministry would be something you'd be interested in. And regardless, you've still got to go back and get your graduate degree and get counseling. So, why don't you give that a try? Take the classes for the first couple of weeks, and then if that's not what you want, we'll switch you over. I was like, okay, cool. So that's what I did, and I decided. So my sophomore year went into that full steam ahead, and had a good experience. Had a good time, and was able to, be a part of several different programs and youth works, and it's based out of Minnesota actually. Went to Milwaukee and helped with the logistics and operations of inner city missions work and helping people. So we had different sites there, and such a amazing opportunity experience. I loved Milwaukee. It was a great place. And came back, and my junior year was, you've heard this story 1,000 times, kind of when I started questioning a lot of things and questioning my faith and questioning just what I believed. My buddy Derek asked me, why do you believe that? We were sitting there at lunch one day, and I realized later, I didn't know at the time, I didn't have an answer, but I realized later that it was because that's what I always knew. That's all I had ever known. And so kind of start of like trying to figure out, what is it that I believe? What do I actually believe? And not just what do I know, but like, what do I believe? And that was the beginning of that process, which later led me down a different route, I guess, in my life. I finished out school there. Youth ministry, adolescent studies and youth ministry was my title of my focus or my study, I guess. Liberal arts degree. I had a lot of opportunities there. I got to be a part of, it's where I learned about invisible children. I got to be a part of that on-campus group and help lead that, for a couple of years, and which then kind of opened the doors for me. I ended up going to Haiti my senior year with my buddies Joel and Nick, and we also had gone to Costa Rica, which was my first time kind of like getting outside of the country and exploring the world, I guess, which was really fun, something that I had always wanted to do. And it was my first crack at, travel outside of the United States, which was it was an amazing opportunity. Thanks, Joel. I always give Joel my credit for all the crazy things I've ever done in my life. We jumped off a waterfall there, and I don't know, we just did some stupid stuff in our day. But so this kind of led the way for me. Post-college, I ended up going to Haiti, spent 2 months there. I was supposed to help with the start of a construction trade school, and that opportunity fell through actually the day before I left. And I just went. I was just going to go, and I'd figure it out when I got there. Felt confident, cocky, arrogant, maybe naive to the struggles and to just what I was getting myself into in some ways, but ended up being for the best. It was an amazing experience, and I met Bobby Hoffner, and her and we ended up traveling for that 2 months, and she introduced me to Project Teach, another great group that's teachers that are helping other teachers in Haiti, kind of learning new techniques and empowering them to take different things back to to their classrooms, which is really, really cool. Got to just experience the culture. I feel like that was the biggest thing I took from my experience in Haiti, was just experiencing the culture of Haiti, and learned so much and got to experience so much. It was really cool. I'm excited to go back now that we live in Florida. It's one thing I really want to go back, and I want to take my wife and be able to show her the different places and the beauty that exists in Haiti. And we think of some of these countries as these like poor, whatever, desolate places. And it's not that they don't have pockets of that. It's not that they don't have that. It's not that it doesn't exist, but the people are beautiful, and your experiences and the way you get to like just experience the world is beautiful, and there's beauty within all of it. So I'm really excited to be able to take her there and show her the country of Haiti. It's going to be fun. It's going to be exciting. From there, I went straight. I had 4 days back at home and went straight out to San Diego and started working for Invisible Children, where I did 2 tours, traveling around the country. So I worked in Deep South, which is actually where I'm at now. It was Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and Florida, where was our territory, and I was in charge of Florida, and right where we're at right now, actually, which is bizarre. And then my second one was Midwest, which was my like home area, basically, which is Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio. And so I got to do both of those tours, and then I ended up coming back, and I applied for and got the position of a lead intern. So we were supposed to be helping with the interns and kind of like leading them, and I ended up taking over the vans and our fleet of vans. We had a bunch of different vans, and honestly, if I'm completely honest, it was in an effort to not have to make cold calls to schools and places of worship and colleges. I really hated cold calls. They were painful for me. And so I really just took on that opportunity to expand and grow, that process of the fleet coordinator. And I grew into that position, and that ended up being my full-time position. And then I ended up working as a fleet coordinator and shipping. It was a shipping and fleet coordinator. So I took on a couple different roles that year, with shipping and making sure that our teams were getting the merchandise that they needed, and being the liaison between, the shipping department and the movement department, which was, our tours. There was a gap there, and I was able to fill that gap in. It was really awesome, and develop that program with the fleet. I ended up buying, ended up buying like 6 different vans for the company for Invisible Children at the time, and getting those, branded and painted, and the logos that we wanted on those vans, and being able to take part in that process was transformational. Just giving me the opportunities that I had there. I would never have the opportunities anywhere else, and it was a great opportunity for me. It's one of the greatest experiences of my life, was working at Invisible Children and being able to be a part of that group. It was amazing. I ended up leaving, Invisible Children, and I moved to Minnesota, where I lived with my best friend, Sam, and another one of our friends, a couple of our friends that were married, Matt, who has since passed away. He took his own life a couple of years ago, and it's an unfortunate situation, but it's I moved to Minnesota, and he's who we lived with, and Sam, and him and his wife, and then their little baby Marley, and his wife and Marley are doing well, still living in the Twin Cities, and so is Sam, with his wife and his 2 kids, and it's where I met my wife. And when I moved there, I started working for a company called Joyful Companions as a caregiver, and so I did 24-hour care and just different one-on-one care and transportation and whatnot as a caregiver for their different clients, elderly seniors, mostly. Most of them, not all of them, but a majority of them had some form of dementia or Alzheimer's, and so being able to spend time with them and kind of learn and grow and give back and help people. And then I decided I wanted to coach. It was something that I really wanted to do, and I had done some coaching when I was in college and with wrestling, and I wanted to give back. So I left that position and joined, I started subbing in the schools. I started subbing in special education, and then it allowed me to coach full-time, not full-time, but fully be available to coach. I was a full-time volunteer for 4 years, and then the last 2 years of my coaching career, I was able to get paid, and to do that as, something extra that I could do to better my life and better my career. And I don't know how to say that. It sounded weird, but there it is. So I ended up, working in the schools for the last pretty much 4 years of my time in Minnesota. I worked in special education and worked at a couple different schools, and got out of substitute teaching fully and went into working as a paraprofessional, or I was classroom, I don't know, some word that made it sound cooler than it was, but education assistant too, at a school in White Bear Lake in Minnesota. And now we're here. Fast forward to present day. That was a little synopsis of my life, but one of these days maybe you can hear a little bit more about some of those different stories. I kind of fast forwarded through the last bit there. We're running low on time, but I think my life has been an adventure for sure, and it's always been trying to just find my place, and I'm continuing to do that, and that's okay. But I just know that I'm going to continue to give back and continue to do good. And for you guys that are listening, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you so much for listening. I want to say thank you so much for supporting. It's an honor to have people give value to my voice and give value to this podcast and whatever sense that it is at the moment. And just know that we're working on things. We want it to be more than just this, and be able to give back. Again, the big focus is to do good and to make a difference in the world. I'm going to wrap things up. I want to say thank you so much for listening. I want to say, I don't know, just thank you. I really appreciate you all. If you enjoyed the show today, man, I'm slacking. I'm in my head. If you enjoyed the show today, visit us on Facebook and Instagram. Give us a like, give us a comment, tell us something you heard, something you liked. If you have a question about my life, if you have a question about, something on the podcast that was said, or a comment about something that was said, please let us know. We want to hear. We want to know what you think. We want to know what you're taking and what you're interested in. So if there's more about that you want to contribute and share, please let us know. We want to know what your thoughts are as well. If you want to go above and beyond, get the word out and share the CrazyFaceUno Podcast with your friends, your family, random strangers. All are welcome. Please visit CrazyFaceUno.com to buy our merchandise and donate. Your contribution helps us share more stories like mine and stories just like yours, allowing us to empower, love, and celebrate people, projects, and causes. We love you all so much. Thank you so much for listening. We appreciate you. Peace.